My name is Dino Forfante, and I'm the Director of Business Development at ibali. Today we're going to talk about how you can optimize your engineering and manufacturing processes with NetSuite. NetSuite has been continuously working with customers to understand better how to design and revise the products they produce, as well as how they optimize the production process using contract manufacturers. Today we're going to explore a few examples of that and how you can benefit your business. Here's what we're reviewing today. First, we'll introduce our team on the phone and give you an introduction to ibali and who we are. Then we'll introduce you to some new enhanced features NetSuite has developed to help you manage your manufacturing operation. And finally, we'll wrap up and take questions and talk about next steps. Let's go into introductions. Again, I'm Dino Forfante, Director of Business Development at ibali. I've been working with NetSuite for over 12 years as both a business owner that implemented NetSuite and as a Director of Consulting Practices. I have industry experience with both Fortune 500 and mid-market companies, including many ERP systems. Joining me on the phone today is Amy Knust, who will be walking us through the presentation today. Amy is an experienced NetSuite implementer and solution engineer. She's a CPA and is certified in multiple ERP applications. Amy has over 25 years of experience in consulting and with manufacturing and distribution clients, and currently manages our solution engineers team. At ibali, we like to think of ourselves as advisors first and technology providers second. We only succeed when our clients succeed. And that's why we're a driving force every day to help you find the best way forward. We bring our knowledge, our passion, experience to transform the way you do business and deliver lasting results. ibali has been around for over 100 years and is a top 20 CPA firm, but ibali is much more than that. We're an award-winning consulting business, advisory, and professional services firm. We're driven to help clients take on the now, the next, with inspired ideas, solutions, and results. Our team has experience that spans multiple industries, using a proven services approach that focuses in on business processes and user adoption. Our practice also specializes in complementary technologies like Salesforce CRM, data analytics, integration, and advisory services. Our service offerings are also focused on helping with today's unique challenges. Other areas of importance our firm can help you with are R&D tax credits, state and local tax compliance services, and by providing evaluation and application assistance with the new CARES Act small business loans. Our ibali team provides services to clients across the United States. We've successfully implemented over 500 implementations and boast an award-winning team. We have 55 consultants holding up over 100 certifications with an average of 10 years experience. Our team has also earned America's Solution Partner of the Year award for the last 5 years. This award is based as much on customer experience and success as it is with a strong growing NetSuite practice. If you have questions on ibali and who we are, or you're interested in other services, please contact your client success managers. Work orders and assemblies, a core component of NetSuite ERP, offers powerful functionality for your organization to manage everything from the design process to executing on manufacturing production orders. Today, we'll explore a few of those features NetSuite has developed to enhance the capabilities of the solution for manufacturers. If you have any questions as we progress through the presentation, let's put those into the Q&A section of the Zoom meeting, and we'll respond at the end of the presentation. Work orders and assemblies support the creation of a bill of materials associated with an assembly item. The standard bill of materials allows you to manage your components and their required quantities, along with item sources and component yield. To support more advanced requirements, NetSuite has added the capability to support multiple bills of material per assembly item and multiple revisions of a single bill of materials. As we look today at some of the functionality around bill of materials management in NetSuite, we'll review the expanded capabilities related to managing multiple bills of material and their associated revisions, including the ability to build assemblies to a specific bill of revision. These features allow you to have better control over your production process and ensure that your customers are receiving a product that is built to the appropriate design and specifications. NetSuite natively supports two different types of contract manufacturing, turnkey and tolling. A turnkey contract manufacturer will source all the raw materials on your behalf and charge you one fee, inclusive of materials and labor. This functionality is natively supported through the use of a standard purchase order, as seen in the diagram above. A tolling contract manufacturer will supply little to no components required to build the end item and will only charge a fee for the labor. This model is slightly more complicated to support in a standard ERP application, which are designed to track internal labor, and machine costs against production work orders. So today we're going to focus on some of the new automation available out of the box for companies that utilize tolling contract manufacturers. Here are the demonstration topics Amy will be presenting. If you have questions on another feature not in the presentation today, your client success managers will be available to schedule time to follow up with your team. Amy, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dino. All right, the objective today is to talk about some of the more advanced functionality that's available surrounding bill of materials, revision management, and automated contract manufacturing. To do that, what I really like to do is lay the groundwork and establish what some of the current functionality is if you do not have these features enabled, so that we can compare and contrast the standard functionality with some of the more advanced functionality. So we're going to start with an environment that does not have advanced bill of materials, engineering change control, and the outsourced manufacturing functionality enabled, and look at the features of a standard bill of materials and how we would manage revisions within those. I've created a couple of items for us to look at today. The first one is going to be an effective date managed item. So we'll take a look at how we might manage the bill of materials for an item that is utilizing effective dates. On the assembly item record, you will find a field on the purchasing and inventory tab, generally, that is called effective BOM control. And this is going to determine how you are managing revisions for that bill of materials. There are two options for revision management. One is to use effective dates, and the other is to use revision control. Once you've selected revision control as your option, you are not able to revert back to effective date for that assembly item. What you'll notice as we scroll down within the purchasing inventory tab is we have a components subtab. So there is a one-to-one relationship between the assembly item and its associated bill of materials. We have no ability to differentiate or create multiple bills of material for the same inventory item, which might be important if you have a need to build to perhaps a specific customer's design specifications, or you have multiple ways of producing the same item. So in this environment, without advanced bill of materials enabled, you see the component sub-tab on the purchasing inventory section of the item master file. And you'll notice that this is an effective date managed item. So from a revision management standpoint, we're able to identify an effective date for each component within the bill of materials and an associated obsolescence date. So what I've done in this model is I've effectively replaced the electrical component, which is going to be valid through June 30th, with what's called component 1, which will be effective July 1st. Okay, so it's not difficult to make those changes, but what is difficult in this environment is to ever see a full bill of materials as of a specific date right within the item master file. It somewhat needs to be reconstructed utilizing the effectivity dates. Now let's take a look at an item that leverages revision management. I created a copy of the same item, and I essentially changed my effective bill of materials control to revision control. And the difference that you'll see in the component section of the assembly item is that I am no longer managing dates for effectivity purposes. I actually have revision codes. And so you can see that the first 5 items are relevant for revision A, but as we enhanced our product and further developed it, the electrical component became obsolete at revision B, and the component item became available. And we get an effective date on that revision. So that is the date that will become effective for any work orders created thereafter. It becomes the current or preferred revision. Now you can still build to a previous revision. You have the option to do so. So let's take a look at what a work order looks like in this environment. Go to Transactions, Manufacturing, enter work orders. And we're going to start with an effectivity date based work order. First thing I'm going to do is select my subsidiary, which is US2. And that's going to give me visibility to the assemblies that are enabled for that particular location. So I'm going to choose my SAF 100 with effective dates. And you'll notice it immediately populates the bill of materials. But if you'll recall, with an effective date of 7/1, we had replaced this electrical component with something called COM001. It is not showing up here because my effective date and my production start date are both before the effective date of that change. So I'm going to go ahead and revise this effective date. And what immediately happens is the system recognizes that the bill of materials is different for that particular production date, and it automatically removes component ELC001 and replaces it with COM001. Okay. So you can build to whatever version of that bill of materials you want to, but based upon the production start date, when you're using effectivity dates, it will override your selection to the current version of that bill of materials. Now let's do the same thing for one that leverages revision management. I'm going to select enter work orders again. Choose my subsidiary. Then I'm going to select my revision managed assembly, which is the SAF 100 with revision management. What you'll note is, again, I still got the original bill of materials that's built to Rev Level A, which is my current revision. I now have a new field available to me called revision level, and I have the ability to choose which revision level I want to build to. Now, if I would default this production start date to be beyond July, say July 15th, it will automatically assume I want to build to the effective revision on that date, right? Just like it did with the effectivity date. So they work in a very similar way, but it's a manual process with no approvals to make changes to your bill of materials, and you really don't have revision level history. These are some of the new features that are available when you enable advanced bill of materials and revision management. So let's go through an example of what that looks like in an environment where that has been configured. I'm going to go ahead and switch companies now and get into a manufacturing company where all of these features have been enabled and are currently functioning. So we'll be the administrator in our Stairway for Manufacturing environment. And what I want to do is illustrate for you how these features would be enabled. Advanced Bill of Materials is a native feature with NetSuite. You do not need to make an additional purchase to have access to this. The engineering change control feature is a function of the supply chain management bundle, which is also a free bundle. You simply have to install and configure it. I have found, however, that there are multiple versions of that supply chain management bundle, and it's important to make sure that you're installing the most current version. If you need some help, please contact your CSM and they can connect you with the right resource. So I'm going to go ahead and say set up company enable features. And we're going to review where these items are configured. So on the items and inventory subtab, as we scroll down within inventory, we're going to see an option trying to find it here. I think I missed it. Here we go, called Advanced Bill of Materials. By checking that box and saying save, you will get a message that recommends that you do this in a sandbox environment first, because it has a significant impact on how work orders are processed, on how the item master file is stored. There are a lot of other business objects that are impacted by this change. So I would caution you on doing that in your production environment immediately, but this is where that feature is held. And if you do have a sandbox environment, it would be good to test it there first, or get some assistance from your Eide consultants. In addition to that, I'm going to show you an additional setup feature that's going to be relevant for later in our presentation, and that is outsourced manufacturing. Now, this one has less of an impact on your overall environment. There are some unique configuration requirements to make this function properly, but it's not going to completely modify your inventory master file or change the way you process work orders. So it is probably okay to activate this in your production environment, but you still might want some guidance on some of the prerequisites for setup and configuration. So checking this box of outsourced manufacturing is what turns on our automated tolling-based contract manufacturing functionality. And then finally, the last thing that we want to do here is enable, under supply chain management, the engineering change control feature, and that is done under preferences. There is a checkbox called engineering change order. Again, this is a bundle that needs to be installed in your environment in order for you to have access to these features. It also offers you several other additional functionalities that might be useful, including customer part numbers, estimated landed costs, some enhanced printing capabilities within inventory, and some item substitution. We're going to be focusing today on engineering change control. All right. So now that we are fully enabled, we can begin to use the features in this environment. Again, I have set up an item for us to use. This one's called SAF 200. And it is a solar attic fan. We're going to look at some differences in the item master file when you have enabled Advanced Bill of Materials. As I scroll down, you'll notice that there is an additional tab here, or sub-tab, called Manufacturing, where the components used to be managed on the Purchasing Inventory tab in a one-to-one relationship to the item. We are now managing multiple bills of material for the same inventory item. So what we get is a sub list of all of the bills of materials that are applicable or available to use as we're producing this solar fan. The initial bill of materials is this SAF 200. I have created an alternate bill of materials with some substitute components from a different vendor. For purposes of illustration, you'll also notice that each of these bills of material can have multiple revision levels. So you have a one-to-many relationship between items to bills of materials to revisions. It allows you a tremendous amount of flexibility to produce to the appropriate configuration and to have visibility to all of the previous configurations of your items. So let's take a look at this SAF alternate bill of materials. So I can click on this. And what you'll see is you can actually use the same bill of materials for multiple assemblies. So you actually have a many-to-many relationship. If you had the same configuration of component parts that was used in multiple finished goods, you could leverage the same bill of materials for that. What makes me able to do that in this environment is this box that says available for all assemblies. In my case, I have this restricted to just the SAF 200, but perhaps my SAF 100 is a really similar model that has different production steps in the process, but I could leverage the same bill of materials to produce it. I could simply control click the SAF 100 and it becomes available for that assembly as well. I'm not going to make any changes to my environment today, but just illustrating the capabilities. In addition, we can turn on component yield. which allows us to track that scrap and waste that might be a natural part of our production process and extends the functionality of the bill of materials. I can also restrict a single bill of materials to specific locations. In my environment, I have them applicable for all locations. And then I can additionally restrict them to just specific subsidiaries. Now what you'll see is I actually have multiple revisions of the alternate bill of materials. And I can view each of those revisions by right-clicking and opening that in a new tab. So I get visibility to the complete bill of materials for each of these revisions. And the revisions can either be created manually through a copy process, or you can leverage the engineering change control to automatically create these revisions for you through the change management cycle. And we're going to illustrate that example today. The final thing to note is that for every bill of materials, you need to associate it with assemblies. In my case, I only have it associated with one assembly, and that's the SAF 200. That means that it's going to show up on that manufacturing subtab of the SAF 200 item that we just looked at. So that gives you kind of an illustrative example of what a bill of materials looks like. Within a given revision is where we start to see the component parts. So the components are stored at the revision level, and you can have multiple revisions per bill of materials. So my alternate BOM, you'll notice, is using my electrical component, my fan wire harness, fan solar panel, the controller assembly, and the frame assembly. It also has an effective date. So these revisions become effective, and that's what allows the work order process to default the appropriate revision based upon the production start date. Okay, now let's look at how we would create an engineering change order that would then modify one of these bills of material. Actually, you know what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a new bill of materials for you that is a customer specific bill of materials. I'm going to close a few of these windows, and I'm just going to go to my actions, make a copy option. So this is how I'm creating a brand new bill of materials for this specific assembly. And I'm going to call this my Smith Supplies configuration. Smith Supplies is a customer in my account. It should default to the appropriate assembly, which is my SAF 200. I'm going to leave it available for all locations and associate it with the subsidiary. What's going to happen here is it's going to insert a revision, my Smith Supplies, and I can then edit the specific bill of materials associated with that. Now, I may want to just have one revision for this version. And then I want to make sure it's appropriately assigned to a subassembly. So let's choose our SAF 200 to make sure this new Smith Supplies version shows up on my item master file. Okay, so I've created a new bill of materials, copied it from an existing, created a revision, and assigned it to my finished good item. Oops, that must be the wrong. Okay. Let's go back to our SAF 200 assembly. Open him up again. And you'll notice I now have 3 bills of material that are associated with that item. Now let's take our Smith Supplies bill of material and let's modify it through the engineering change control process. I'm going to say lists, engineering change order, new. I have to choose a subsidiary. We'll say we're in our United States subsidiary. And I get to choose an engineering change control type. Now these are user-defined types. The 2 that I have set up are adding a new part or making a part change. In this case, I'm going to make a part change. And we can describe what is the purpose of this part change. I'm going to say we're having a dispute with the standard vendor, and we've found an alternate supplier. So we have a new part number that we're going to be using going forward. I can choose the effective date of this engineering change control, and I want it to start on July 2020 because I'm going to use the parts that I currently have in inventory up until that date. I'm going to say right now this is in a pending approval state, and I can have workflow auto assign my next approver, but I'm going to just assign that manually, and I'm going to assign myself for simplicity for this demonstration. The next thing we want to do is add bill of materials changes. What's important to note with an engineering change order is that it can apply to multiple bills of material. It's possible that I use this part that is now problematic for me because of a dispute with a vendor in multiple assemblies, right? And I only want to create an engineering change order once to replace the part in all assemblies. So just keep in mind that, again, we have a one-to-many relationship between this engineering change control order and the number of assemblies that we're going to be changing. But I'm going to say add by BOM changes. And it brings me up to a sub window where I get to specify what I'm doing. I can add a part, remove a part, or replace a part. And in my case, I'm going to replace a part. And I'm just going to replace the HDW 100, and I'm going to add the COM 100. Let's see if I type it correctly. Okay. There we go. Oh, got the wrong part. There we go. Then I need to add an assembly item that I want to make that change to. And I want to use my SAF 200. There we go. Let's grab SAF 200. And then we have to choose which bill of materials we want to make revisions to. Now you'll note that the original bill of materials is not listed here. There is a setting that you can define in accounting preferences that determines whether or not what they call legacy BOMs can be managed through the engineering change control process. My setting is set to no. So I would need to create a new revision and then do engineering change controls beyond that. But in this case, I'm going to say for the purposes of my Smith Supplies bill of materials, I'm going to modify revision 1, and I'm going to create a new revision in the process. Okay, right now it is not implemented. It had an effective date of sometime in July or July 1. So I'm just going to go ahead and say save. And it adds that change to my list of change details. And if I wanted to add another BOM change, I could do that here as well. So if there was another assembly that needed to have the same replacement made, that would be possible to do. So I'm going to go ahead and say save here. And it's just telling me, hey, if you have used the same action item and replacement item, then we'll merge it together for me. And I've now created the engineering change order. You'll notice the status updated pending approval, and the next approver is Kathy Cardigan. So this is any standard workflow function that could send out an email to our approver. It could maintain metrics over that approval process. Because I assigned to myself, I have the ability to come in here and simply change this to approved. And now that this is approved, we can view the details in this ECO implementation status. Or if we're ready, we can trigger this for implementations. It's almost like a separate approval step where it's going to solidify that change as of the effective date of the revision. So I'm going to go ahead and click the implement button. And that change will be made at the point in which I call it implemented. Now it's going to take a little bit. It's in a pending state right now, meaning the script is working in the background to successfully implement my engineering change order. All right, so that takes us through a review of the engineering change control functionality as well as the advanced bill of materials capabilities. Now let's take a look at how we might extend our manufacturing process or automate our manufacturing process when we leverage tolling-based contract manufacturers. You already saw me enable the feature in outsourced manufacturing using the feature enablement function. Now what you're going to see me do is create a purchase order. There are a few prerequisites that need to be set up in order to utilize this feature. So let's just look at locations for a moment. You have to have an outside processing location configured. Now, there's nothing specifically unique about this outside processing location. There's no additional features or functions that have been added to the native NetSuite location functionality, but you at least have to configure a location as an outside processing location or define it as such. You next have to define a vendor as an outside processing vendor, and I have done that with the vendor called ACOM. And on the vendor record, there is an outsourced manufacturing subtab that gets added automatically when you enable the feature. And you can define one or more locations that this vendor uses for outsourced manufacturing. I have just defined one location, so that's going to default into all of my transactions. And then finally, you need a specific manufacturing charge item to place on your purchase order. So I'm assuming that I'm outsourcing some of the production of my solar panel, and I've created something called the SAF 100 manufacturing charge. There are only 2 item types that are available to be used within the outsourced manufacturing capabilities, and other charge for purchase is one of those. So I chose that option when I was setting up the item, and you need to specify that it is in the cost category of outsourcing charge. So those are the 3 prerequisites that you need to perform in order to enable and utilize this feature. The next step would be to create an outsourced purchase order. So I'm going to go to Transactions, Purchases, Enter Purchase Orders. And the key to making this work is utilizing the appropriate form code. So for outsourced manufacturing, the bundle will enable this out-of-the-box form called the Standard Outsourced Purchase Order Form, and it dramatically changes the line level of the purchase order. I'm going to choose my outsourced vendor. And by the way, just a little tip and trick. Once you have established a vendor as an outside processing vendor or a subcontract vendor, you cannot use them on a standard purchase order. So this is a limitation of the functionality, and you will get an error message if you try to put ACOM on a standard PO. What you'll notice about the items subtab of a tolling-based outsourced manufacturing purchase order is we now have essentially 2 item fields. One is asking for the assembly, and for that we're going to use our SAF 200. And the next is asking for the other charge item that we're actually going to be paying that vendor. And only the items that you have specified as contract manufacturing items with outside processing source will be listed on this menu. I put a rate of $200, assuming that's the labor charge that this particular vendor charges me to produce the SAF 200. And it defaults into my standard bill of materials, but I can leverage any configuration that I want to and the appropriate revision. I can define a preferred production start date and an expected delivery date of the item. Oh, it eliminated my item. There we go. That's what I needed. There we go. All right, so now we have created a line, and you will notice that there is a field here called create work order. And it says yes. It's very much like a special purchase order or special work order would be in standard NetSuite. One of the automations that this functionality enables is the ability to create a work order automatically from a PO. So I'm going to go ahead and say save. Oh, I guess it thinks I have a blank line here. We'll go ahead and say save. And that's going to run through the workflow that not only saves this work order, but also generates, or saves this purchase order, but also generates the work order. Now, keep in mind that you still need to go through the standard replenishment process to make sure that your outside processor has inventory on hand to commit to this work order. So you can leverage demand planning to do that. You can leverage reorder points, all of the standard functionality in NetSuite's available, but there is no automation around procuring the necessary components and providing them to your subcontract manufacturer. All right, so now we have the saved purchase order. Scrolling down, you'll notice a work order was created and is linked back to this particular purchase order. It has also changed the location of this work order to be the outside processing location of that specific vendor. It's assigned the appropriate bill of materials and the revision level that we selected, and it's listed all of the component items that are required to produce this product. All right, so the one challenge I have here is that none of my items are committed. So what I'm going to do is repeat that process with my SAF 100 and get my items properly committed. We'll choose our outsourced PO. We will choose our ACOM vendor. And add our line items. I'm going to use the same manufacturing charge item. And then I'm just going to choose a revision here to my bill of materials and add my appropriate production start and end dates. The reason I want to do that is because I want to be able to show you what the receive and build process looks like. And I'm definitely going to need to have committed items to do that. All right. And again, we have a work order. Let's drill down to that and let's make sure that our items are successfully committed. I at least have sufficient quantities to commit, but what happened is this work order came in as planned as opposed to released. So now upon releasing this work order, it should properly commit my quantities and allow me to move to the next step in the process. Let's go ahead and say save. And my quantities are now properly committed against my work order. What you'll notice about an outsourced manufacturing work order is there is a slightly different button here at the top of the screen. Essentially, when you are building this assembly, you are simultaneously receiving the product against the purchase order. So it's performing those two steps for you at the same time. If I hit receive and build here, it will take me to the standard item receipt screen. The other option you have is to simply refresh the screen here. Oh, this is the wrong assembly item. Let's go back to my other purchase order. Is to simply receive this PO. And that's going to have the same effect as utilizing the receive and build button, The reason I like this model is because it's a little more consistent with likely what the receiving department is doing on a regular basis. They're probably going through a PO receipt process as opposed to a production build process. But this is simultaneously going to create the assembly record for me. So I'm going to hit the receive option. And there is something called the assembly build helper over here. Let's say your contract manufacturer reported to you that they actually had to use an additional quantity of the electrical component because there was some damage and they had some scrap. You can actually account for that here. It essentially opens up that the work order build screen for you and allows you to complete that right within the assembly process. Now, the other thing you can do here is I do have bins turned on in this environment, so I need to make sure that there are bins assigned. And if I was doing lot or serial detail, I could assign the lots and serials for the finished good item at this point as well. So they try to make this a very simplified process. I'm going to go ahead and say save and complete the item receipt. What will happen then is it's not only receiving the SAF 200 manufacturing charge item, but it is also completing the assembly build. It is possible to change the receiving location at the point of this receipt and have the system auto create a transfer for you from the outside processing location to your standard warehouse. So it's possible to do that all in one step. I have not done that here. I simply received it to the outside processing location, meaning I would have to create a manual transfer. So what you'll notice is it adds this assembly build to my item receipt, which drills me down to the assembly build record, where I have an outsourced processing tab linking me back to the original item receipt that this was generated from. And had I received it to my standard location, it would have automatically created the linked inventory transfer. I'm going to drill down really quickly on the GL impact, because what I really like about this feature of NetSuite is it allows us to take the cost of the labor that was involved in this subcontracting environment and roll it into the finished goods. So if you remember my $200 manufacturing charge, it is now getting credited to my expense account and capitalized up into my inventory. This was really challenging to do in standard NetSuite prior to this functionality. So if you want to get the labor costs associated with your outside processing built into your inventory cost, this is one great tool to do that. And that concludes the demonstration portion of this webinar. I'm going to turn it back over to Dino for the rest of the discussion.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks for the demonstration. And now I'd like to turn it over to Kim Hitchcock to cover any questions that were presented in the presentation.
There is only one question for you, Amy, and I believe it came in during the engineering portion. And it was, can you have it auto implement, or do you have to have this process all the time?
So that's an excellent question. I believe we could have it auto implement, but it would require the creation of a workflow to do that. I don't think that it does it out of the box, and there's a configuration option that you can turn on. I do think you normally would have to go through that implementation process, but I believe with a workflow, we could automate that for you.
Great, and that is all the questions we had that were still open.
Thank you, Kim. So we know your journey and next steps. We know your journey with NetSuite continues to evolve for an implementation optimization. At iBailey, we offer a number of different support options to help you with your journey. Everything from on-demand support to a full array of managed services. If you have need or interest in any of these services, please contact your client success managers. Again, thank you for attending this presentation, and this concludes our webinar today.